Hey, what's up, Raiders? This is Bill back here with another Raid Shadow Legends video. I am happy to be discussing today the Shadowkin champions that have been just released. We're reviewing the 4.20 patch. If you see part 1 of this video, we looked at the first 4 champions for all the other factions, and today we're going to focus on the 6 champs that came out for the Shadowkin faction. And this could be putting us much closer to that crypt getting open. I think this might put us at 20 champions total for the Shadowkin right now. So be looking for that crypt to open. If you are close to getting Lydia, I would suggest working on that very hard and getting her locked in before the requirements go up. Unfortunately, it does look like Plarium is going to just add that extra crypt on before Lydia instead of after Lydia. And so we're going to take a look at these new champs. We're going to start off with Hatatsu, who is an epic rarity magic affinity defense type champion, and obviously in the Shadowkin. So we have a pretty sweet looking thumbnail. This guy looks a little bit more like a demon spawn than he does a Shadowkin, and that does kind of bring up that question of, you know, when we started this faction, they weren't specifically a samurai faction, right? If you remember, they did talk about using Eastern influences from mythology and history. So you'll see a variety of, I think samurais, ninjas, different things like that, and some of these characters that would be more from Eastern mythology. And I would love to hear if you know anything about where some of these characters are sourced from in Eastern myth. I would love to see that commented down below. And while you're doing that comment, don't forget to like and subscribe. So Hatatsu, a defense type champ, his A1 is going to be attack one enemy. We'd like to see more of those AoEs, but it's an A1, so we're also putting a leech in, which is great, that 40% leech, and it will book up to 60%, which is really nice on an A1. A 2-turn leech that keeping those leeches up can really replace that lifesteal gear that a lot of us are running, especially in that mid-game area, so that we can open up the ability to put on different harder hitting gear, or some specialized gear like your stalwarts and your stuns and some of those sets, instead of running your lifesteal to keep champs alive. So keep that in mind anytime you see a leech champ, especially with an A1 leech. They're a great candidate for counterattack, retaliation gear, and those types of things. I got my Grush in retaliation gear, and he's smacking that leech on all day, with using his own A1 when it comes up and hitting that counterattack. The A2 is going to be an AoE, so now we're going to get into the opportunity to hit all of our enemies. 50% chance of placing a 50% decrease attack debuff for 2 turns. And you can book that up to 60, 70, 80%. And with a fully booked, it's going to cool down in 3 turns. 4 turns without books. And his A3 is going to be the Oni icon, placing a 60% decreased defense, increased defense buff on all allies for 2 turns, and a 15% continuous heal buff on all allies for 1 turn. So that is kind of interesting. His kit plays a little bit more like a support type, but he is a defense type champion. So being a defense type with a support kit, that his defense should scale, his hit point or his damage should scale off of defense, and that allows us to build him a little bit more tankier as a support champion. And he does have a passive. We're seeing a lot more passives. Spirit Touched removes 1 random debuff from this champion at the start of each turn. It will remove Stun, Sleep, Freeze, Fear, True Fear, and Provoke debuffs before other debuffs, which is pretty cool. And get those out of the way so that he can still take his turn. And he's going to have an aura of increasing ally defense in all battles by 25%. I saw with a release in some of the patch notes today, after this came out, so we're seeing all these new passives, right? Well, there's a new block passive skill that's coming out soon too, with some new champs. So look out for that, because these passives are starting to become something that a lot of us are using to get around block cooldowns and to get around some of the other, more difficult areas in Doom Tower. So we're looking at some of these champs with cool passives to help get around some of those abilities. Well, we're going to start seeing block passive ability debuffs coming out. So just watch out for that. Our second champ is Chani. This is a epic magic affinity attack type Shadowkin. So we're going to open up the A1, will be an insidious arrow, which will bring some poison sensitivity. We're going to attack one enemy with a 40% chance of placing a 25% poison debuff for 2 turns. Right, that poison sensitivity is going to, increase your poison damage and hopefully help you to really smack pretty hard on some of those bosses and waves. But definitely with those bosses, if you're going to lay that poison sensitivity on one person, and I'm glad to see this coming out more and more on more champs. It was a great debuff that came out with Frozen Banshee. For a long time, she was the only one that had it, and I would love to see them even add some of this debuff into other skill sets and other kits from past champions. And we can book that up to hit for 60%, a 60% rate on this A1. And we're going to look here at Soulfire, which is our A2, placing a 50% increase accuracy buff and a 50% increase attack buff on this champion for 2 turns, then attacks one enemy. We'll place an HP burn debuff for 2 turns if critical. And you can book that down to being a 3-turn cooldown. No need to book your placement percentage because it places it automatically with an accuracy check. Your A3 is going to attack all enemies. Shower of Misery, attacking all enemies. 50% chance of increasing the duration of all debuffs by 1 turn. So we're going to have an opportunity to drag out those debuffs. You can book that up from 50% to 60, 70, 80% chance in a 3-turn cooldown with books. And the A1 has quite a few books on it, but the rest of this champion's booking requirements really aren't that bad. Let's take a look up here at Hatatsu. The A1 is huge. 8 books, 6 books, 15 books on this champion. Whoo-wee! That is a lot. And then here you've got, for epic champions, that's a lot of books. 5, 6, 11, 15 books here too. Oh boy. Stay with those books. Here you go. And our next champion is going to be Genbo the Dishonored. He looks like a fun guy. He's an epic champion, Void Affinity, attack type. And his A1 is going to be Twin Soul Swords. So hopefully he's carrying 2 swords and looking pretty awesome out there on the battlefield. Attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit steals any increased attack buffs. Also, each hit has a 30% chance of stealing a random buff. I'm guessing that the way this reads is he has 2 opportunities to steal buffs. Can steal the increased attack, and after that will also have a 30% chance of stealing another buff. And stealing the increased attack cannot be resisted. So that is pretty cool. And we can book up that 30% chance to a 50% chance by throwing 8 books on his A1. So there's that. A2 is going to be a Heartless Blitz. Attacks all enemies with an 80% chance of decreasing the duration of all buffs by 1 turn. This effect cannot be resisted on critical hits. And we can book that up to 100% and 3-turn cooldown with 5 books. The Sword Trance, his A3, is going to place a 30% increase crit rate, which you see that we've got on critical hits here, so that's going to synergize with his A2, and could allow you to build this champion to 70% crit rate, a lot easier to get to, opens up the opportunity to throw some crit damage gauntlets on him, and crit damage amulets, and that kind of stuff to try and get that damage number up. right? A 30% increased crit rate and increased crit damage on this champion for 3 turns, then grants an extra turn. And you can cool that down to 4. So you could have that up almost all the time, as long as you time your debuffs properly, or your buffs properly. And again, another passive, we're going to see this character immune to decrease attack debuffs, will ignore unkillable debuffs when attacking under increased attack. So he cannot put his own increased attack on, but can steal it from somebody else, and will then ignore unkillables. Or you could pair him up with, champs like Grab, Arbiter, things like that, to get rid of that, to sneak in under that unkillable and put that increased attack on him. I also would wonder how well he would synergize with, say, like Ultimate Gaelic, who needs increased attack for some of his abilities, to proc. Barangi, I tried practicing to say this name before we did the video, because I knew this one was going to be tough. Barangi, Epic Force Affinity Defense type champion. All right, I like to see lots of defense type champs. I think that they build better. You can take that defense up on them and up their damage at the same time, without having to, do the whole attack and then trying to build defense or HP on champions as well. I feel like defense champions are way easier to build. So Battering Skull, we're going to attack one enemy with a 20% chance of placing a Provoke debuff for 1 turn. 20% chance is kind of low, and we can book that up to a 40% chance. So not as high as some of the A1s we've seen on the other characters so far, and we're still looking at 6 books for that A1 to get fully booked. Big Mono Charge attacks all enemies, has a 40% chance of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn. And you can book that stun debuff up to 60%, and you can cool it down 3 turns with 5 books. And his A3 is a Frightful Warcry, places a 25% strengthen buff on all allies for 2 turns, also places a shield debuff for 2 turns on all allies with less than 50% HP. The shield is equal to 15% of the target's max HP, not his max HP, which I think is a little bit better with a defense-based champion, because you're not going to be stacking that HP up really high when you're trying to get that defense up there. If this was an HP type champ and his other skills, his damage and stuff, were scaling off his HP, I'd rather see that be off his max HP. And the other problem is that you run into sometimes with target's max HP is a lot less control over what that's going to be, where you can just stack HP on a champion who's going to put a heal based on his HP or a shield based on his HP. You can just stack that champ up and get them ready to go, and then you know what it's going to be. It's not going to vary from character to character. And he does have a passive, Soulmonger, healing this champion by 50% of their HP max whenever an ally or enemy dies. Wow, whenever an enemy dies too. That is pretty cool. That's a crazy that's a pretty crazy passive right there. Every time something dies, I mean, you think about that, like say like in Spider Dungeon, when you're killing those spiderlings, and he's going to heal 50% of max HP. This guy is going to stick around in dungeons like that, and he's going to be increasing ally resist if you put him in that lead by 40 in all battles. This guy's looking pretty good. Marauder. Now, I've heard that the rares are not something to get too excited over, but we do got to propagate that faction. So let's see what we got. Spirit Affinity HP type. Marauder is going to be our first HP type today. Genbo Jutsu attacks one enemy, and you can ascend his A1. It's a little more rare to see an A1 ascension. To attack one enemy, then also have a 15% chance to place a stun for 1 turn. And you can book that stun up with 5 books to have a 20-30% chance. Doesn't really feel worth it for 30% and 5 books, but it is a rare, so you know we can get those rare books. You can get them in the bazaar for just 1,000 gold bars. Once a week you can snag one up. Make sure you're doing that on a weekly basis and stacking up those rare books so you can have a nice library set aside for when you get characters like this and for your clan versus clan tournaments. A2 Reckless Sweep attacks all enemies, has a 50% chance of placing 25% decrease attack debuff for 2 turns. And we can book that 50% up to 60-75 and reduce the cooldown to 3 turns. Roaring Challenge is his A3, a 50% chance of placing a provoke debuff for 1 turn. Places a shield on this champion for 2 turns, equal to 20% of their max HP. See, that was where we're talking about that, because he's an HP champ, so that you like to have the shield based off of his HP, because you're going to be stacking that up anyways. Hit a little bit harder and increase that sustainability. And he's also going to place a 15% reflect damage on all his other allies. So he'll shield himself and reflect damage off of his allies for 2 turns. Has an aura of HP ally of 15%. That's probably not going to be effective for the majority of your mid-game accounts. Some of your early games, I think. I'm trying to remember if that's about the same, I think, as your starter champions. They might all be 15% HP. Vagabond is a Spirit Affinity support type champion, and he will come in with that A1 called Dreamer's Curse, attacking 1 enemy with a 20% chance of placing a sleep debuff for 1 turn. I'd like to see sleep maybe change a little bit to where it was somewhat more effective. You can book that up with 6 books on his A1, taking it to a 30-40% chance of placing that debuff. And Omnimus Visit is our A2, which definitely, again, sounds like a bad dream. This guy is kind of scary in that way, I guess, huh? He attacks 1 enemy, has a 50% chance of placing a block buffs debuff for 1 turn. Also will fill this champion's turn meter by 15% and fills the turn meter of the ally with the highest turn meter by 15%. So that's a nice little bonus there, right? That's a 4-turn cooldown, 3 turns when it's booked with 5 books. And you can increase that chance of your block buffs from 50 to 75% with 4 books. And his A3, Join the Troop, is an ascendable skill. Basic, we're going to fill the turn meter of all allies by 15%. And when ascended, you're going to fill that turn meter by 15 and place an increased attack buff on all allies for 2 turns. And he will bring an arena aura of increased accuracy by 30. So he's not too bad. He's not too bad for a rare. I do wish that they would change that sleep ability a little bit to make it somewhat more useful for the majority of our fights, but he's not bad. I like that those little turn meter boosts that he's got. So those are our 6 new champs for the Shadowkin faction. No new rares today, but I don't know if I was gonna rank. I definitely, the rares out of the 2 rare champs, they don't particularly jump off the page at me. I like that he's got those turn meter boosts. I think that I like Marauder better. He's got that reflect damage and then does some shield and provoke work, and he's also got a nice little AoE hit in there. This Vagabond guy is pretty cool. I love that he's filling turn meters and doing some of that work for us on 2 different abilities. But I think I'd like Marauder better. As far as the epics go, I think that I would rate them with Genbo being my favorite, and then Hatatsu, Chani, and Barangi bringing up the rear here. So happy raiding. Enjoy the new champs. Hopefully you have some good luck pulling shards in the next weekend or so. We have a 10x coming up if you're watching this. Today's May 6th. There's a 10x coming up this weekend for some really cool champs. Man-Eater is in that 10x, and Duchess. So happy raiding. Stay safe. Don't forget to like and subscribe.